Hello everybody and good afternoon. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your afternoon to join this Access Pay webinar on a new way of thinking and how to transform your business payments process with the cloud. My name's Danny Doyle. I'm the Product Marketing Manager at Access Pay, and it's myself that will be taking you through this short webinar. We anticipate about 30 or 40 minutes with enough time for a question and answer session at the end. You are able to communicate with me today using the chat function on the Cisco WebEx product, and there is also another tab that should be there on your screens for a question and answer at the end. So without further ado, I'll get started and we'll go straight into just an introduction to the actual material that's going to be covered in today's webinar. So as you might have guessed, with the title A New Way of Thinking, what we're trying to get across here is that your business payments process does not need to be, complicated. It doesn't need to be expensive. And actually, there's a lot of ways it can bring real benefits to your business by looking at your financial processes and thinking how you can speed them up, make them more secure, and make them cheaper more than anything else. So we're going to be talking with particular focus on online banking portals. There are many hundreds or even thousands of businesses around the UK still using online banking portals for their business payments. So we'll talk a little bit about what they are, how they serve a purpose, when and where they should be used, and really with a bit of reflection on how they might not be the most appropriate tools for certain kinds of business payments. We'll also talk about the advantages of direct submission. So that's plugging straight into the BACS or faster payments infrastructure for things like direct credits and direct debits. And we'll be talking about how the benefits of using a software supplier to plug into those networks can bring real benefit to your business. We'll talk about how to automate your payments as well, with particular focus on something called straight-through processing. We'll also have a bit of a comparison. It's going to be talking about really balancing efficiency and, the speed of process with level of control and security. We'll talk about the scalability of different products and different online banking solutions and really how you can get ultimate peace of mind by looking at a scalable solution. And as you might have guessed, that's covered off with scalability in the cloud. And like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a short Q&A at the end. If you do have any issues with hearing me or viewing the screen, please feel free to pop a message through on the chat function. I am happy to take questions throughout the webinar, but if you would please leave them until the end, we can make sure everybody gets their money's worth out of the session. Okay. So we're talking initially about the advantages of online banking, and we have to ask ourselves the question, what is online banking? I would imagine the vast majority of the people that are attending the webinar at the moment have used online banking in some way, shape or form in their personal lives. It is quite often used by businesses as well. There's a couple of examples of different online banking channels there on the screen. So we can see Barclays have their .NET product, Lloyds have their Lloyds Link product, and HSBC have HSBC Net. Essentially what these are, they're web-based portals to allow you to send messages into your bank. And more often than not, when we talk about payments and direct debits, that service actually has to send on those files to the relevant payment infrastructure, which we are juxtaposing with the concept of direct submission. It's not just about payments and collections though. So you can see on the screen it mentions it's a web portal for account servicing. There's a lot of things that you can do through your online banking channel. You can obviously retrieve things like your statements and balances, and it's a really important tool for anybody who works in finance to perform an effective reconciliation process. You can also perform inter-account transfers and things like that. We would imagine that most businesses, they wouldn't go ahead with a full BACS run just to move money from one account to another. You can open accounts quite often, and you can also manage the signatories and who the responsible people are for managing your banking and your accounting process. And as it says at the bottom of the page there, they can also, in most cases, handle payments and direct debit collections. I've mentioned earlier that there were probably 3 core types of payments that we're going to be discussing today. We've got the concept of direct credit and direct debit, which are processed through the BACS network. And we've also got the faster payments service as well, which is transferred through a very similar network known as Secure IP. Both of those are managed by VocaLink. So when we talk about direct submission, we're talking about plugging direct into those 2 networks. So what can it do for you? Well, let me be absolutely clear. Direct submission for payments and collections does not replace online banking or most of their services. We've just run you through a few of those, and we're only talking payments and collections here. And it's very important what we always recommend here at AccessPay for our clients and our prospects to keep banking channels open. But the question we're trying to answer today is it the best process for your business as usual payments operations? There are some clear benefits. Most are offered free of charge. The bank usually recoups any charge by the transaction fees that they take for processing your payments through their services. It will obviously be used for statement and balance retrieval, and it can also be used for instant intra-account transfers. But is it the best channel for business payments? We believe not. I'm going to take you through a few examples of where our customers have told us, when they've moved to AccessPay from a previous online banking or legacy solution, these are a couple of the issues that people have mentioned to us and part of the reason why they chose to go direct. So there's invariably manual processes involved with online banking. Some smaller businesses will use a package where actually if they want to pay their staff or if they want to pay their suppliers, they have to manually go through and select beneficiaries from a list. And this is an incredibly manual process. A lot of customers, though, will have an accounting system. So if we think Sage, QuickBooks, Xero, and things like that, generally that's where we believe your beneficiaries should be managed. Because after all, it's the system where you store invoices and many other accounting things to do with the data around the people you're paying. So even if you weren't having to go through and manually select beneficiaries there in your payment solution, quite often you're going to have to actually go in and manually upload a file by searching through your computer to the correct folder and upload it there. It might not be a mammoth task, but it does take a bit of time. The main reason we have a problem with that here at AccessPay is it's not only quite inefficient, but it's a security risk. Many people who've worked in finance departments will know about the notion of manual intervention. As soon as a file is saved to a particular location on a user's desktop, there is the opportunity for somebody to go in and edit the details of that file. The next point, though, I think this is a very important point when we look at scalability, and that's the transaction fees that are charged for using online banking services. I indicated earlier that the bank actually has to perform a value-added service when you go through their online banking solution. And the reason why is they've got to receive those payment instructions from you. They've got to then send them onto the relevant payment networks themselves. So quite often there is a substantial transaction fee when going through online banking. In every, in every experience that we've had when people move from online banking to direct submission, that transaction fee comes down. So when we're talking about scalability, if you are a growing business and you do see your volumes of payments or collections increasing, then it's very quickly not going to become a cumbersome and manual process, but it's also going to become very, very expensive. And as it mentions on the screen there, some direct solution suppliers don't have any notion of transaction charges whatsoever. We've always got to talk about cut-off times as well, and this all comes back to the fact that the bank needs to send on these files on your behalf to the relevant payment networks. So some banks even have a cut-off time of around 4 p.m. for a payment to be classed as being submitted on that day. When you go to direct BACS access or direct faster payments access, BACS you can submit files from 7:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night. So in a disaster recovery situation, that possible extra 6 hours could be quite useful if you've got to get an urgent payroll file out 2 days before the end of the month. The faster payment service is actually available 24/7 as well. One of the points we always find, and this is generally in everyone from small to large businesses, is balancing the risks and controls around your payments process. We would always recommend that best practice dictates a strong segregation of duties, so that if one person uploads the file, they should never be the submitter. And if one person has rights to submit the file, they should never be the person who has input that. It's a very useful mechanism for making sure that nobody has gone in and manually intervened with a file, and it's also a very useful mechanism just to make sure nobody's paying themselves a load of money when they shouldn't be. We should always talk about segregating visibility as well, because payroll is always a very sensitive area. You might not want your customer services department, who handle your direct debits, or your purchase ledger team, who handle your suppliers, to see the contents of your payroll file, for example. We work with a lot of professionals companies, and things like director or payroll, things like director or partner payroll can be a very, very sensitive area. So, you know, is it the best channel for your business payments when you're not able to segregate visibility by payment type? We believe not. And as I've indicated a short while ago, you know, automated submissions are absolutely impossible when you use online banking. There is always the manual task of having to upload that file into the system, select the relevant accounts, and then finally usually use a PIN or a smart card service to sign and send off the file. You know, that may not be a particularly cumbersome task, but if it does take you 15, 30 minutes once or twice a week, and you can actually automate that entire process, well, already we're looking at hours or days per month, which your business can have recouped by automating those submissions. A couple more as well, you know, not every online banking system allows direct debits. So quite often what that means is a small or medium business will use an online banking channel for their payroll and for their accounts payable and expenses perhaps, but they would use a different system for the direct debits. So it's always good to have one single system, one single approvals process, and more importantly, pay only one solution supplier for an all-in-one product. Many of you on the webinar today that are using online banking, you may not remember this, or it may have been your IT team which you had to get involved, but you have to match the file formats that they accept. You know, if we take Lloyds, for example, they will only accept one particular file format, and if your Sage system or if your Xero or QuickBooks system doesn't produce that, then you're either going to have to get your IT team to convert it, or you're going to have to pay somebody to actually generate that custom file. When you go direct, there are solution suppliers that can map pretty much any file from any back office system that you might imagine, which means no changes initially, but if you actually change one of your back office systems, for example, move from an on-premise Sage system to a web-based Xero system, then you've got ultimate peace of mind that that direct submission platform is going to be able to accept that file. And I think everybody who's worked in finance or at least used the BACS network will be familiar with the BACS Payment Services website. It's an extremely cumbersome, extremely manual system, and it causes real problems, not only for payments, but direct debits. Reconciling those reports when it takes you half an hour just to go on and retrieve them can be a real issue, especially when we talk about the efficiency at which you manage your process. So we've talked about a couple of the benefits of going direct. We've talked about, more than anything, some of the areas where online banking just isn't up to it. The problem I believe the banks have is there are a number of different products being used by different sectors of the market. And one of the most common stories we see is a small business who has actually grown, and they've outgrown the online banking product that they're using, but they've not been offered another one from the bank. So they're still using a solution which perhaps fit their needs when they were much, much smaller, but they've grown. So it's not only inefficient, but very, very expensive. So to conclude the comparison really of online banking and direct submission, we would always recommend that a direct submission software be used in conjunction with an online banking service. I mentioned earlier there are lots of services which you do get and you do get benefit from in terms of the online banking portal. So it should complement but not replace online banking systems. You know, we've mentioned how it's not ideal, we've mentioned how it can be inefficient and expensive and also a security risk, but in a contingency situation, perhaps where you're not able to access your offices to use your locally installed software, then the online banking solution, you know, would present a real good contingency or backup solution. And as I mentioned, there are other account services which direct submission software for payments and collections cannot replicate. You're always going to be going to online banking to check how much money you've got. You're always going to be going to online banking to check if a particular supplier has paid you, if they've sent you a BACS or a CHAPS payment, or even just to check that a check has cleared. But to summarize that particular element, we believe that direct submission software is a much more efficient, much more cost-effective, and much more secure way of managing your payments and collections, but it should always be used in conjunction with an online banking system. So when you go direct, we need to talk about some of the benefits that can offer you. And really, this section isn't just for people who are perhaps using online banking or considering a move to direct submission software. A lot of this should be talking about best practice. It should be talking about things which we, in many years of being in this business and taking on hundreds of customers, it's something that we have learned would always be important considerations, I guess, when using a BACS software. So when we say file agnostic, what we mean is that, you know, the typical corporate, they might have 1, 2, or 3 back office systems. You might use, you know, a Sage system for accounts payable. You may use an Iris system for payroll, and you might use a CRM like Salesforce for direct debit. So what that means is you've got 3 different file formats, and to avoid any costly bills of having to change things, or, you know, perhaps even worse, pay the provider of your direct submission software to change anything, then you should be looking for a file agnostic solution which allows different input formats from different back office systems, usually using something like a file mapping tool, because what that means, if you do change one of those systems, you're not going to face a big hefty bill just for adding it to your existing software. Going direct truly allows you to use the BACS network anywhere, anytime. It can be used in evenings and weekends. It can be used from home or on the move. But one of the big problems which online banking services face, especially at evenings and weekends, is downtime or maintenance windows, which can be a real problem for any business which doesn't only run Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We've mentioned the security risk as well of files passing over users' desktops. You know, for some companies, they're absolutely fine with it. They may have a finance team who they really trust and has been with the business for years or decades. But there should be no opportunity really ever for a user to manually intervene with the contents of a payments file. If a file is exported from a Sage system, it should go into a protected network location where nobody could edit it, and using an automated or encrypted file upload solution like the one we offer with AccessPay means that nobody has the opportunity to go in and tamper with that file. We've mentioned this before, lights out automated processing. The only way you can achieve this is by looking at a direct submission software. Automating your submissions process can give your finance team hours or even days back per month when they can get back on with the things they do best, and that's running your business. You know, this isn't possible with an online banking solution. And there are 2 ways you can automate your processing. That would be using something called a HSM, which I will explain a little bit in a short while, or using an indirect or bureau service. The workflow and approvals logic in direct submission software varies greatly. Some are very rigid, some are extremely configurable, and it would allow you to control exactly what your users see and do. when we have a powerful workflow engine and we use that in conjunction with an approval, it assures an efficient, secure process. And the way it does that is, if we segregate duties, if we have an uploader who then decides they have uploaded the file, they can't go any further, it now needs to be passed to an approver, we'll configure in an email alert to be sent to that person, ensures they're on that, and they go and approve it as quick as possible. If that person then needs to pass the file to a submitter for a second signatory, then a workflow that not only mandates that they do it, but alerts the next user in the chain to go on and do the processing, can only be a more efficient process. So I've mentioned a couple of times now, lights out processing. So what does it mean? Well, it's the concept of exporting a file from one of your back office systems or from a web page in the case of things like direct debit sign-ups or faster payments for a payday loan, for example. It's the concept of a file being exported from a back office system. So this is one of your systems on your side, whether it's a Sage or a web page or anything like that. It's the concept of that file being approved in that system, approved for export, and once it's exported, it's going to be sent straight through to the relevant payment networks. There's not only going to be no manual intervention, but there's no further manual overhead required. It is undoubtedly the most efficient payments process. You're always going to have to use a system to generate that file. But if you've gone through an approval process to get there, if you're happy that that file needs to go, or if you're happy that that particular payment has been approved and should be sent to back, then many customers ask us, why should I do anything else? Why should I go through another 10, 15, 20-minute process just to get that file off to the bank? If I'm happy with it, why not just send it straight through? But it is an important notion that, these files need to be pre-approved. If one user is allowed to simply export the file on their own, then what we need to think about is how we balance the level of security around that with the level of automation. When you're using a lights out processing system, one very important thing which our customers have fed back to us is that the system alerts are absolutely key to this entire process. If you're going to be exporting a file and trusting a system to send it straight through to BACS or to faster payments, then you need to know it's gone. So there are a number of email alerts which come with systems like AccessPay, and there are more than I've mentioned on screen, but the key ones are that that file has, number one, successfully been uploaded, number two, that the file has successfully been validated so that we've checked the bank details in there so that nothing has been stripped out because it was an erroneous file or there was nothing suspicious within it, and finally that the file has been submitted. So put in brackets there, submission summary. For many finance departments that we speak to, that is the final link in the chain. That is when we've gone from Sage, we've taken it through the appropriate process, and we now know we can tag that submission summary back to the system it came from so that we can mark that payment file as sent. Using a lights out processing system, we talked about the very cumbersome, very manual BACS Payment Services website earlier. Using a lights out processing system with a HSM or with a bureau service can automatically download those BACS reports. So the key ones, especially for direct debit, are the unpaid report, the ADAX report, which is any amendments or cancellations, and also the Audis setup report. Those are absolutely key to your business because they need to be actioned as soon as they're available. So if we can automatically download them for you, or if a lights out processing system can auto retrieve them and send them back to you, then it means that you can get on with actioning those reports as soon as possible, and it's one less manual task to reconcile them from your finance system. So we've talked about what lights out processing means. We know it's a very, very efficient process. We know it can save you lots and lots of time in your finance department. So how does it work? Well, without getting too technical, the payment or collection files are uploaded using something called Secure FTP. So that's an automated file transfer service, and what it says is, when a file is exported from Sage to this FTP program, I will send it automatically to AccessPay. So we've already got round the security risk there of any manual intervention. It can also be uploaded using something called an API, and that is known as an application programming interface. And what it does is it's essentially a piece of code which allows your SAP or your Xero system to talk to AccessPay, and that's in real time. So again, that's going to be able to send the file from the back office system through to the AccessPay portal in an automated, encrypted fashion. So we've talked about how the file gets to AccessPay, then how are they going to be sent onto the relevant payments network? Well, they can be sent using cloud-based access to a HSM. That automates the smart card signing process. So many people in the webinar will have used smart cards in the past. They can be a bit of a nightmare to manage. You know, pins need to be remembered. You need to make sure you don't lose them. You need to make sure you've got smart card readers available and the appropriate software packages installed to use the smart card. So what the HSM does is it takes the digital signature from that smart card and it stores it in an AccessPay cloud environment, for example. And what that means is then, at system level, the AccessPay solution is able to automatically stamp that particular file and send it on to BACS. So nobody needs to use a card, therefore we can send it straight through. It's as simple as that. It's very important to know that HSM, that's a hardware security module. With a solution like AccessPay, there's no requirement to purchase or manage any hardware. That's already been purchased. It's being managed by the AccessPay infrastructure team in this case. So all that is required is for you to speak to your bank and ask for a hardware security module or HSM certificate. The other way which you can benefit from straight-through processing, and it's one way that you wouldn't actually have to pay your bank for a HSM certificate, is using an indirect bureau service. The reason you would get away from using the HSM in that particular case is because the bureau is sending the file on your behalf. We will talk a little bit later about BACS-approved bureaus, but we've got two methods there of automating that route from back office straight to the relevant payment networks, and using a system like AccessPay, you'll get all the responses, alerts, and submission summaries to let you know that the file is on its merry way and it's finally made it. There's usually a period of about 3 to 5 minutes from exporting that file through to that file being returned as a submitted status. So we're not talking a particularly arduous journey here. You know, we always we always say that you can export the file, go off and make a brew, and by the time you're back at your desk, you'll have received the submission summary with the email alert to say it was successfully processed. Some customers, though, they do ask us to put a buffer in there, a little bit of a delay, and that's so that they can double and triple check that the file sent was the correct one. We would always say that should take place before export, however. When you do have batch reports and those submission summaries which mark the file as sent, they can be sent back to our users via a secure link or drop back in the FTP folder, which is that automated file transfer service which I mentioned earlier. Now we've got on to one of the most important questions which I think corporates and SMEs face when they're talking about their payments process. Because there aren't many areas in a business where you wouldn't want to make things more efficient. It's obvious. But one of the greatest challenges people have is balancing that level of efficiency with the level of security and control they have over their payments process. You know, the payments process at the end of the day is the main constituent of your company's bottom line. If you can't make sure you get paid or you pay out your suppliers and your payroll, then your business isn't going to function properly. So it's very important to have a level of control over it, but we also need to try and balance that with how onerous that process is and how long it takes. So we often say there's a bit of a trade-off, speed of submissions with level of control. And I think the most important point to mention here is when we talk about level of control, if that level of control and that approvals process perhaps takes place within your back office, and you know that a finance user and a finance manager would need to approve a file just to get it out of your accounting system, then there's an argument that says, well, that's already had enough approvals, it's already had enough control. We know that the finance manager's given it the tick in the box, so why do we need anything else? So it's a very important thing to note that, you know, you can benefit from straight-through processing and an appropriate level of control. It's just that we shift where that control happens when we talk about automated submissions, and we push it back into the back office systems themselves. This trade-off is especially important for BACS-approved bureaus. We deal with a lot of bureau clients. A lot of them are things like payroll or direct debit specialists, or one of the most common areas is accountants. And those accountants, as well as offering bureau services, quite often offer many other services to that particular accountant, to that particular client, sorry, and that's things like tax, things like audit and other business services. So from what we've heard, you know, these accountancy firms, they see the bureau service that they offer for doing things like payroll or outsourcing the accounts payable as quite a high-risk, low-reward element of their business. So their priority, they need to be using an efficient a process as possible, because they have cut-offs and they have deadlines to send them out. You know, they need to report back to their client that they've made the payment. So efficiency is key, but the level of control is absolutely critical for these customers. Quite often we see they mandate a multi-stage approval. They need an uploader, an approver, and a submitter. You know, there is no reason why those 3 stages of approval, however, cannot happen within a back office system. And if they do, if we're quite happy that the payroll manager and the partner have signed off on a particular file, then we believe the best thing to do in that case is send it by straight-through processing. You're not spending hours or, you know, days per month or year doing it, because it's all already been taken care of. So it can bring real benefit to your business. Some of the other features of a system like AccessPay or a direct submission software would be things like workflow and alerting. You know, to these BACS-approved bureau clients, you know, they need to have, I guess, ultimate peace of mind that only the relevant members of staff have been involved with that particular process. They need to be sure, for audit purposes, that, you know, that nothing has gone awry, that nobody's gone rogue or nobody's manually tampered with a particular file, because they need to report that back to their client quite often. And there are over 700, or I think there's nearly 800 BACS-approved bureaus in the UK. It's a very mobile service. If you don't get the service you require from your BACS-approved bureau, it's very, very simple to move. So it's something that this sort of client sees as an absolutely critical element of the software they choose to use. So having a full audit trail for compliance and client communication is a very, very important and very, very neat function from what we've heard. So for those BACS-approved bureaus, I'll just very quickly mention a little bit more about the BACS-approved bureau software which exists on the market and also through AccessPay. They particularly find real problems with software or regulatory upgrades. So anyone who is using direct submission will remember the SHA-2 or TLS upgrade which took place earlier this year. A lot of other solution suppliers took that as an opportunity to end support or terminate their agreements with their existing clients, because they decided this is a very apt opportunity to try and charge them more. You know, looking at a cloud vendor like AccessPay in this instance that offers this on a service basis means that quite often those upgrades are included in the annual fee that you pay with absolutely no increases. But it's of particular concern to these BACS-approved bureaus because quite often their whole or a chief element of their business is based around this bureau service. So being forced to upgrade, changing their processes is not something they react particularly well to. If we talk about the scalability of this software as well, you know, all bureaus should be trying to add on new customers. The more customers they take on, you know, logic would dictate the more money they're going to make. There are other direct submission software vendors, the vast majority of the market actually, that will charge on a per-son or a per transaction basis. And what that means is, as you add on new customers, yes, your revenue will increase, but also your ongoing or operational costs will increase. Using a scalable solution like AccessPay will mean that you don't have to pay for taking on new clients, you don't have to pay for adding on their volume, and you can benefit from what we like to term penalty-free growth as you take on those clients. Same goes for adding new file formats. You know, the customer approaches you as a BACS-approved bureau and they say, will you submit my direct debit file? It comes from Salesforce and it is in a particular format. Then we believe you should be able to add that format to your system at no additional cost. So there's a very useful file mapping tool here within AccessPay that says, okay, if you've got a new type of CSV file, or if one particular client asks you to send an Excel file, you can configure that straight into the system without having to pay any more. So that brings us finally onto the penultimate slide here. And this is just a little about AccessPay in particular. A lot of what we've mentioned today, they're benefits of going direct, although there have been a couple of references to the way AccessPay works in terms of the product and functionality. What I want to introduce you to here, though, is the AccessPay software as a service model. Now, software as a service is something that's been around a couple of years. You know, up until probably two years ago, maybe 18 months ago, AccessPay was the only BACS-approved software supplier who was offering cloud-based BACS and faster payments products. What that meant then is there was no requirement for customers to install a particular program on their network. They had all sorts of disaster recovery worries if they weren't in their office, or if there was a flood or a fire or something impeded their access to that locally installed software. So when I say cloud, you know, let me be very clear, this software is installed in our data centers, buried deep underground. There are no such concerns regarding disaster recovery uptime or business continuity, because it's all hosted elsewhere. But the software as a service model doesn't just concern where this software is hosted and all the associated disaster recovery benefits that you might get from that. The software as a service model dictates the way we operate as a business, the way we deal with our customers, and the promises we make to them when they take up our services. We believe it's an ongoing partnership. As it's a one-year rolling contract, our customers have ultimate flexibility. If they don't like our service, they can leave after a year. There's no other vendors offering a one-year rolling contract, which I believe shows the confidence we have in our products and services. But because it's a one-year rolling contract, you know, the better service that we offer, the better products that we offer, the more likely you as a customer would be to continue using our services and to continue renewing your contract year on year. It's also a fixed annual subscription fee, and that's for life, as you can see there on screen. We talked about there's no transaction fees. We talked about there's no charge if you want to add a SON, or you can configure your own file formats there in the system. But there's no concept here at AccessPay of an annual increase. There's nothing to do with inflation. Quite simply, you pay an annual fee, and as long as you want to use that service, that's the price you'll pay. We also include all product and network upgrades free of charge in that annual subscription. So every one of our hundreds of customers which went through the BACS upgrade earlier in the year got that at absolutely no additional cost. And as I mentioned, that's not something that the other vendors were doing in the market. They were using that as an opportunity to up the fees. There's no transaction fees or usage charges. So as you grow, as your volume of direct debits increases, as your business grows and your list of suppliers or your list of staff is increasing, you don't need to bear any additional charge for that. So that penalty-free growth, we believe it has to improve your bottom line. And all that amounts to peace of mind on future cost. You sign up to the AccessPay service, you pay an annual subscription fee, and if you want to use that for 10 years, that's the price you'll pay. And really that's the essence of how we try to operate our business and how we try to deliver this service to our clients. We believe it's only fair, and I hope that that's come across in my presentation today. So just to cap off, really, thank you very much to everyone who's attended the webinar today. We really appreciate your time. I hope you've learned a lot really about the way which online banking can work in conjunction with direct submission. I hope you've managed to take some learnings on best practice away, and hopefully something that you can implement or at least think about within your finance team on how you can make sure you've got the most efficient process, also balancing that with security. There will be a short period now for some questions and answers from our guests. I can see we've got loads of people on here, so if you would like to send a question, I'll do my best to answer it in the limited time we've got left. So you can do that using the Q&A function on the Cisco WebEx service. If you don't want to ask a question now, or if you would like to ping anything through, whether it's talking about best practice or you want to explore the AccessPay service anymore and talk about what that could do for your business, feel free to drop me an email. My email address is down there on screen. It's danny.doyle@accesspay.com. Or you could give us a call as well. The phone number is 0203 282 7152. So I'm just going to go on the Q&A function there. I'm just going to see if anybody's popped a question through yet. So hello. So we've got James Pringle with one or two questions there as well. So thanks very much, James, for your time this afternoon. I can see you got some questions for me. So one of them was, are there any areas you think online banking portals are better than the AccessPay solution? I'm hoping we covered some of that earlier on in the presentation, actually, but I think there are definitely areas in which the online banking solutions, they need to be used by businesses. There's no way, for example, at the moment when you go through the BACS or Fast Payments Network for us to be able to tell you how much money you've got in your account. There's a very important point. So account management in terms of statements, balances, and reconciling any payments that you've taken in is always going to be used through online banking. We believe that will change within 2 or 3 years. There's some regulatory changes going on which will open up access to lots of other players in the market, but for the moment, for the next 2, 3 or 4 years, online banking solutions will and should be used in conjunction with payment software as well. There's another question there. Thanks, James. So you're talking about direct debits here, and you mentioned lots of manual processes, which is a big admin overhead. Do we have any tips on how we could improve it? Well, one of the challenges customers always face with direct debit is the fact that, yes, you're in control over the amounts to be collected and the dates that they'll be collected into your account, but the customer is always protected by the direct debit guarantee. So you're not in complete control. Actually, one might say that the customer themselves are in complete control over the money that can be pulled from their account, and so it should be. Because one of the problems which we see very, very often with people who use our software is the customers can go away any time and cancel that direct debit. So if you're expecting funds to land in your account and that's been cancelled, then they're not going to arrive on the day which you expected, and that will harm your cash flow. So I think trying to automate your report download processes means that you can jump on those reports as soon as possible, get in contact with that particular customer, or do whatever action might be appropriate within your business model. Get in contact with that customer and get it sorted, because the sooner you do, there's going to be less impact on your cash flow. There is one step further you can go with batch reporting as well, James. So there are 2 formats that you can download those reports in. The HTML is the one that probably 99% of the market use, and that's an easy way to print off a list of any failures or cancellations and go off on that and action them. There's one step further you can go, though, and this is a standard functionality of BACS as well. It's not particular to AccessPay, but you can download those reports in an XML format. Now, with a little bit of tweaking, most back office systems would be able to accept that XML report. And what it's going to do, instead of the lady or gentleman who works in your credit control department going through and manually posting those batch reports into your accounting system, what that's going to do is it's going to automatically load them in, and it's going to give you a much more streamlined reconciliation process, because it means that you don't have to have that big admin overhead that you mentioned in terms of reconciling the payments. So speed of submission is key. It's not the be-all and end-all, though, because the reconciliation process, you need to speed that up. You need to look at an automated report download service, and you need to look at plugging those XMLs back into your source system. Ultimately, there's not any way we can help you with customers cancelling or not having enough funds in their accounts to pay your direct debits, but that should help you solve a little bit of your problem, hopefully. Okay, we've got another question here from Stephen. Stephen, thanks very much for joining the webinar today. So, what developments do you see happening with the AccessPay platform over the next year? Well, that's a really interesting one, Stephen, because the way we've built the AccessPay platform, it means that every customer who comes on and uses our software is using the same instance of the software. They're all using the same product, and what that means is if we roll out an update for one customer, it means we've rolled them out for all. So, particularly with regard to product development, we think it's a very interesting area, and we do have a service which allows customers to request and vote on new product features. One of the main things we're working on for Q1 2017, Stephen, is something called proactive monitoring. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to keep an eye on customers' submissions. It's going to monitor them over a period of time. And what it's going to do, let's take the example of your supplier run. So if your supplier payments run fluctuates somewhere between £50,000 and £100,000 every month, it's going to store that data, and it's going to store an average all locked away and all anonymized, so we're not going to know the details of who you're paying, but what we are going to know is your average payout value. And what that means then is AccessPay's system is going to be geared up to say, well, I've just received a file, Stephen, from you, and this month your accounts payable run is £150,000. So what it's going to do, it's going to do a little bit of trend analysis, a little bit of machine learning as well in there to say, this seems out of the ordinary, I'm going to alert this user that there may be an issue. It's not going to stop any payments going. Ultimately, if you decide to plow ahead with it, it's not going to slow you down. But what the proactive monitoring service is going to do is identify any anomalies. It's going to make them very, very explicit to your users. And it's going to force them to think twice, is this right? Have I duplicated this perhaps? You know, another area in which the proactive monitoring service works is if it notices a particular payment that has been sent within the last week, 2 weeks, or whatever period you might define, and it suspects there's a duplicate submission, then it's going to alert you as a user. So we believe proactive monitoring and being on the front foot when it comes to customer issues and fraud prevention can only be a good thing for the people who use our service. I think, Steve, thinking a little bit further ahead as well, you know, what this is at the end of the day is it's a platform which connects to various payment networks, infrastructures, and banks. And the way this is set up is, as soon as a new service becomes available, let's take, you know, the often mentioned example of something like blockchain. So it's something that's a bit of a buzzword in the financial technology arena at the moment. Really, what that's saying is, you know, there are going to be much more intelligent, much smarter ways for banks and other financial institutions to communicate with each other in the future, and they're going to be much quicker. You're not going to have the concept of, you know, 4, 5, 6 days for an international payment anymore. That should be able to be done in real time. So the way we're looking at things like blockchain and other developments, especially following the new Payment Services Directive, which is going to be enacted in, I think it's 2018, is at the end of the day, this is a platform. It communicates to many different payment infrastructures, many different banks around the world. And as long as the bank is offering a service, then we believe we can get that message to the bank and customers will be able to benefit from that service. So as the financial technology world evolves, we not only intend to be keeping up with it, but we hopefully will be at the forefront of it and leading that charge. So thanks very much for that question, Steve. I've had another message. Excellent webinar, and thank you for your time. It was very nice. Thanks, John. Okay, if there are no other questions, I think we'll probably wrap it up. Anybody who does want to send me anything through to my email, feel free to do so. That's on there on screen. And we've got a final slide there. Thank you. That's got my email address, my phone number. Anything you want to discuss further, please feel free to get in touch.